You are listening to Fighting Together. Sit back, relax, and enjoy our daily episodes.
Hi, my name is Tafadzwa, and I'm very happy to have you here. This is another episode of Fighting Together. Yeah, in this episode, I have a whole bunch of things coming up, but just to prepare you for what's coming, I want to say that sometimes when you look in society, there are certain groups of people, like a group and another group there and another group there, and sometimes they have names or brands or labels or crew names or whatever, and understanding where the crew name came from or the gang name or whatever, not necessarily gangs or even gangs, I don't know, but either way, understanding where the group name came from or what the group represents can help you so much in understanding the intricate details about stuff that's happening, I know it might sound confusing, and if it's your first time listening, you're thinking, wait, is Fighting Together about gang fights and stabbings and stuff? No, it's not. After the break, it'll all make sense why I started the episode by talking about group names, groups, group identities, and blah, blah, blah. My name is Tafadzwa, and you are listening to Fighting Together.
You are listening to Fighting Together. Don't go anywhere.
This podcast was made possible through your donations, prayers, and continued support.
Can you believe it that this is episode number 25? The 25th episode of Fighting Together. Yeah, if you are on our YouTube channel, then this is episode number 6. It's the 6th episode on our YouTube channel. It's going to be the 6th episode on our website. The reason why it's counted differently in other places is because on our Facebook page, we spent a lot of episodes doing our crowdfunding campaign. Fighting Together was trying to rally people so that we can donate money towards the crowdfunding campaign, a campaign that was aimed at buying portable, battery-powered audio equipment that I can use even when electricity goes, equipment that I can use even when I'm standing in the street and interviewing someone, equipment that I can use when I move around to different congregations in different parts of the world, in different parts of Zimbabwe, recording hymns, recording sermons, recording all the content that we need online, the content that people are hungry for, right? So we spent a lot of episodes of Fighting Together, rallying the troops, trying to get people to join the fight, to raise money for all that equipment. Now, those episodes are not available on YouTube, because at the time, we didn't have a YouTube channel. At the time, we didn't have a website. And after the campaign was done, we then decided, you know what, we'll just keep the episodes on the Facebook page because we don't want people bumping into them on YouTube and mistakenly thinking that there's a campaign going on when the campaign has ended. Right, so now that that's out of the way, let me get you back to where we were when the podcast started.
This is Fighting Together. We are fighting to make a positive impact in our God-hungry communities. Sit back, relax, and enjoy our daily episodes.
Are you tired of consuming the same old content? Bored by the lack of variety? Stick around. Maybe this podcast will help.
We talked about groups. We talked about, briefly rather, about identities and how a group can have a name, and it's something that's common in society. Even when you look down the different levels of society, down to something like a high school. In a high school, you get cliques of friends that can call themselves, I don't know, like the black spiders, and then they walk around the hallways doing whatever the black spiders do, and you can have friends that can call themselves the superstars because maybe they are the I don't know, the soccer players in the high school or in the primary school or whatever, It's something that's common, right? And eventually, later, as this podcast moves, we are going to touch on two distinct groups, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The reason why we are going to get there is because a lot of people miss out on the weight or the enjoyment that they're supposed to take from the Bible because we don't understand some of the backstories. Some people interchangeably think that a Pharisee, a Sadducee, when you have a Pharisee, you have a Sadducee. When you have a Sadducee, you have a Pharisee. Potato. It's not the case, It's like they're different. The superstars and the black spiders are different groups which hold different principles, different values, The superstars said, we are all about soccer. The black spiders are all about kicking people in the hallway and bullying other kids, I guess. And I will get to that whole Pharisee, Sadducee thing after I go through a list that's in front of me. Yeah, I know, a list. Ooh, things are about to get exciting, right? Yeah, who doesn't love a good list? I love it because as a podcaster, it gives me structure. I can go item number 1, item number 2, 3, 9, 10, 100. End of podcast, Lists are good. So this particular list, it's got some random names that I found on Facebook. There was a post on my Facebook timeline that was posted by, it wasn't posted by one of my friends, but one of my friends got tagged by one of her friends who is not a mutual friend of ours. It's a long story. Let's just say on my timeline, I came across a thread of people who were essentially discussing, reminiscing about the good old days when they were in high school or back when they were in primary school, and they were revisiting some of the crew names, the clique names that they had, in primary school. A bunch of kids can call themselves whatever they want to call themselves, And these are some of the names that were on that list because the people were just coming into the comment section and throwing in different names. Let me just go through them. Someone said, we were called 3T. There were 3 of us, and our names began with the letter T. And as I was going through the lists, I realized that it's common that a number was a common thing in this thing. Like I gave a random example, just saying you can call yourselves the black spiders. But what was common was people needed, or rather felt the need to add a number to the name, So it would be more of the 7 black spiders. Yeah, anyway, let's move on with these names. I hope you're enjoying this. And while we're going through these names, try to imagine in your head what on earth these cliques, these groups of teenagers or pre-teens were all about. I can't even imagine for some of these names, Like there's a group here that's called the Pencil Case Girls. Yeah, I don't know what they were all about. We weren't given any additional descriptions on what the pencil case girls were all about, but I suppose they probably had some amazing, some beautiful pencil cases. Yeah. Yeah, anyway, another one who I thought, whoa, these ones took it too far. They said ours was called the FBIs, and I still have the tattoo. Now, this was a primary school group, and the guy was in a group called the FBIs, and he got a tattoo, and he still has it. And I thought, wow, talk about commitment with a capital C. Yeah, moving on, there was a group called Black Nation, and the black is spelled differently. It's like a cool rather spelling, if you can call it that. No, I read it wrong. Now that I look at it, it's Black's Nation, but then it's spelled BLAXK. You kind of have to have an X in there because an X kind of makes it all cool and strong, and I don't know. And in the description, the guy says, I know when you hear Black's Nation, you're thinking, oh no. Just stick around, bear with me, and I'll read what the group was all about. We don't have the descriptions for all the groups, but this one we do. And brace yourself. Right. We were all tall and dark. A group some of the grammar is wrong, and I'm reading off the comments, so I think I'll try and correct it. The group comprised of talented young men who sang, danced, rapped, writers, poets, storytellers. Some did drawing and let's see, what's this? And clothes designers, right? Okay, like I said, I'm reading off Facebook comments, and sometimes people use like shorthand, incorrect spellings, blah blah blah. So it's a bit difficult to read some of these. Yeah. Anyway, they're still the coolest, and we still get along and meet up at least once a year. Although we are separated by provinces, cities, and universities. Wow. I mean, I don't know if the pencil case girls are still meeting, or the three T's who all began with the name with T's in their name. I don't know if they're still meeting, and maybe you and your clique, your primary school crew, maybe you are still meeting. I don't know, but we have to give Black's Nation their props. You know, they are still meeting. At least once a year, even though they are separated by provinces. And I hope the FBIs, who I mentioned before, if they have tattoos of their crew, I hope they're still meeting. Oh, yeah. Anyway, it's amazing that you get all these groups, you know. These groups form, and knowing what the group is about is a key factor. Like I said before, I talked about the Pharisees, I talked about the Sadducees. When someone reads the Bible, they get to a chapter, and it says, and then the Pharisees came along to Jesus, and they said, blah, blah, blah. And then you move on to another chapter. And then the Sadducees came along to Jesus. And if you don't know what those groups are all about, some of what they're trying to achieve gets lost to you, you know. If you don't know what the Black's Nation is all about, you could run away from them because you have no idea what the Black's Nation is all about. But turns out they were a group of poets who sang, danced, and some of them were clothes designers, you know. But you don't get to see that in the name, you know. I mean, if you hear that, you would think, oh no, I need to get away, you know. Yeah, anyway, like I said, I have a few more on this list. After that, we'll take a break. And after the break, another segment will come in, you know. And in the segment that's coming after the break, I'm going to tell you about a particular group. I'll dig into the group. I'll tell you what the group was all about. These groups that I'm reading here are off Facebook. I'm just reading these off Facebook. So I don't really know what the groups are all about unless the comment explains what the groups are all about. But after the break, I will give you one group. I will break it down, what the group was all about, and we can laugh together and enjoy. But that's coming after the break. Before we get to the break, I have a few more groups here. Right. There was one that was called the Three Mosquitoes. I don't know whether this was a high school group, but I think this was a primary school group. And I hope they did not get the tattoo for the Three Mosquitoes. Yeah. Anyway, there's one that was called the Dope Optimistic Crew. Like I said, these crews, they're not crews that I came across. They're not crews that were part of my growing up. I'm just getting these from random people from all over the continent who were commenting on a Facebook post, essentially giving us the names of crews that they belonged to, either in primary school or in high school. And I guess, I don't know, do we have crews in universities? Sometimes, I guess. Yeah. Right, there was one called 619. Yeah, I know, 619. It's a number that a bunch of you are probably going, yeah! because you have recognized the number. And some of you are probably going, oh no, it can't be the 619 that I'm thinking of. And if you're thinking, is this the 619 that I'm thinking of? Yup. It's the 619 that you are thinking of. Let me read what they are all about. They said, we were in secondary school also big fans of Rey Mysterio. Rey Mysterio is a WWE wrestler, and he had a move called the 619. So they just took the name of his move, his finishing move, and named their crew after that. I don't think there were 619 of them in that crew. I don't know. Maybe not. Or maybe there were 3 of them in the crew. One of them was then called 6, the other one was called 1, the other one was called 9. And then there's always a fight between 6 and 1, because 1 is like, I'm the leader of the crew because I am 1. And then 6 is like, no, the crew is 619 and I am 6. I have no idea what they were all about, but there you have it. Everyone wants to belong to something, whether it's 619, whether it's Pencil Case Girls, whether it's Black Nation with an X and a K, whatever it is. Let's go through the last on our list, and I don't know, feel free to throw in some of the crews you came across or you were part of in primary school in the comments section. I would love to hear from you. Now, there was one called the DOC, which stood for Dope Optimistic Crew. And this was a common trend back in the 90s or whatever, where you kind of picked something that's got a aggressive sounding abbreviation, like DOC. And there's one here that's called NKC, it had to sound like, And the NKC, I don't know what they're about, but apparently the NK stood for Naughty, and the K, Kwaito, and the C, Crew, so Naughty, Kwaito, Crew. And the last one I shall throw in is Sunshine Chocolate Squad. Let's just take a moment to try and picture what the members of Sunshine Chocolate Squad looked like. Let's try and imagine what they were all about. I can't imagine. This is the end of the segment. There's still more stuff coming up. After the break, like I promised you, I am going to give you one group. Not the Pharisees, not the Sadducees. We'll move on to that later. But I'm going to give you one group that I came across in high school. And I'll give you what they were all about. And then we can move on to the Pharisees and the Sadducees and their differences, Just like we are all curious about what are the differences between the Three Mosquitoes, the Pencil Case Girls, and the Sunshine Chocolate Squad. This is Fighting Together. Stay tuned.
You are listening to Fighting Together. Don't go anywhere.
This podcast was brought to you by www.dailypodcast.show.
If you are enjoying this podcast, then I think you are going to love our website. Visit www.dailypodcast.show.
Now, before the break, I kind of threw some names out there, random names like Black's Nation with an X and a K, and the Three Mosquitoes, who quite frankly sound like a very annoying group of individuals. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but when you call yourself the Three Mosquitoes, I just want to squat those mosquitoes. Yeah, and other groups that sound not so annoying, maybe, I don't know, the Pencil Case Girls, and so on and so on. So we went through all those groups, but now I'm going to focus on one particular group. After I'm done with this group, we shall move on to two other groups in the next segment. Those two groups that are coming in the next segment after this one are the biblical groups of the Pharisees and the biblical group of the Sadducees. We are going to talk about what made them what they are. But before we get to those two groups, I will talk about a group that I saw, a group that I knew, which was a group at my school, a group called Sushi Family.
This podcast was brought to you by www.dailypodcast.show.
Now, why were they called Sushi Family? Before we get to that why, I need to give you a background of the school. This was a high school where students would have the age range that ranged from 13 years of age all the way up to 18 years of age. That's Form 1 all the way up to Form 6. So now we've got that out of the way. Let's move on to other things. The thing about this school was you would go there at the beginning of the term, and it was a school where you would spend 3 months at school without going back home. We call those schools here in Zimbabwe boarding schools. I've seen different kinds of boarding schools. I've seen on television some Harry Potter looking aristocratical boarding schools where students walk around like they own the universe and they talk fluent English and look down upon the commoners. No, this was not that kind of a boarding school. These schools were pretty much every Zimbabwean or a lot of Zimbabweans get to go to, at some point in time in their life, It's like a middle class kind of thing. It's not a 1%er academic system where millionaires and billionaires send their children with helicopters to a castle in the middle of nowhere, and then they spend months at that castle learning about how to become rulers of the world. No, it wasn't that kind of a boarding school. No. Anyway, so at this boarding school, you'd spend 3 months there, and within those 3 months, you were not allowed to bring certain items. You weren't allowed to bring personal pieces of clothing. And already, it's beginning to sound like a prison, right? Yeah, you couldn't bring like your favorite Mickey Mouse t-shirt or anything. You couldn't bring that. You had to bring things that were on the list. If the list said you have to bring 5 shirts in a very specific color, you would bring 5 shirts in that specific shade of blue, If it said you need to bring this, if you need to bring that, you had to bring the exact amount of socks that were required, If they say, we want 4 pairs of socks, you couldn't say, 4 isn't enough for me, so let me put in 10. Eventually, people would kind of do it, but it was contraband. You weren't allowed to do that. And in addition to all these rules, now, one very painful rule was you couldn't bring food. So you couldn't bring anything edible. You couldn't bring an apple or some grapes or some chocolates or anything that's like tinned, or cereals. You couldn't bring anything that's edible. No food allowed. The only food that you would eat was the food that was going to come out of the school kitchen. And just to give you a picture, most days you'd be eating boiled cabbage with no meat on the side, but with some sadza. And sadza is like a starchy lump of, for those that don't know what sadza is, how do I describe sadza? I could try and describe what it is, but I'm going to kind of just say, think of, I don't know, potatoes, mashed potatoes, and then think of a lump of them. And that's more or less what it is. But it's not necessarily made of potatoes. It's not made of potatoes. But I'm trying to give you a visual picture that's related to something that you might have eaten or seen in your life, depending on which continent you are on. But essentially, sadza is not made of potatoes. It's made of mealie meal, and it's cooked, and it's made into this pap, which, if you've never seen it, I guess mashed potatoes that are boiled and crushed and made into a pap, the closest visual thing I can give you. I have no other way of describing it. Yeah. And you'd eat that a lot with boiled cabbages. So, sounds delicious, eh? Yeah. If you put enough salt, if you put enough kgs or salt onto your plate, the cabbages would taste decent-ish enough. I don't know. Yeah. And if you're thinking, well, what was for breakfast? Would you have bacon? Was there, I don't know, some good stuff, at least for breakfast? Cheese or something? No, there was no cheese. No, there was no bacon. And you would only have an egg for breakfast once a week. And that was on Sunday. And you couldn't choose. You couldn't say, waiter, can I have my egg sunny side up? And make sure you put on some black pepper there. And sunny side up, remember? No, you couldn't order. You couldn't specify how your egg was to be made. It was a boiled egg once a week on Sunday. I can go on and on and on and on and on about the food and what we ate on what particular day and what we didn't eat. But this is not the segment for that. I just wanted to give you a back story, and I think I've given you enough of it now. Let's talk about Sushi family. Right. So the Sushi family gang was formed in the school. The school that's got all those rules and regulations that I've told you about. And just to let you know, we did not know what sushi was. We knew that there's a food item called sushi, but none of us knew what it was exactly, and none of us knew what it looked like, but we knew that it's, I don't know, something that's possibly from Asia somewhere, as far as we knew, and it's trending, and that's as much as we knew while we were sitting there in boarding school eating our boiled cabbage and our 1 egg per week. So now this raises the question, how on earth did a gang of school students end up being called Sushi family? Not everyone was in this group. You couldn't just join it like any other group in most of society, you needed to qualify and you needed to be chosen, and it wasn't that big of a group. The bigger a group becomes, the less valuable the membership is, I think Sushi family, I don't know how many were in the family. I don't know. I think at most there were probably 5 guys. I don't know. It wasn't a lot of people. And in a boarding school of 800 people, to say a group has 5 or 8 individuals, that's not a lot, Right, so Sushi family, the name came about through smuggling of food. We used to smuggle food because, obviously, to tell a bunch of teenagers that you are not going to eat chocolate for the next 3 months while you're at this institution, that's a big ask right there, We did get to eat chocolates and biscuits sometimes, but you would only do that by purchasing them at the school tuck shop. And the school controlled the quantities that went into this tuck shop. and it also controlled the price, and it also controlled the availability of flavors. So you couldn't just go there and say, I don't like this brand of chocolate, give me another one. Most times there would be one brand of chocolate, and most times there would be one flavor of the one brand of chocolate. And if you say to yourself, let me think about it and come back tomorrow, by tomorrow the chocolate will be out, bought by the 799 other students who were scrambling to get a piece of something else that's not boiled cabbage. Yeah, so in this whole school, in this system, a lot of people worked ways to smuggle food, to smuggle whatever it is they wanted, And I'm talking about serious smuggling crews, and the school also combated it by doing random inspections, a lot like how contraband is looked for in prison. I'm talking about having your blankets thrown around, having your mattress turned upside down, having your school trunk, which was like a chest. I don't know if everyone knows the word trunk, but it's a bit like a chest which you can lift, like a treasure chest, and you'd keep all your possessions in there. All the things you need for the 3 months you're there, for the 2.5 months you're there, would be in this chest, we called it a trunk, in this trunk, It would be dug through and looked upside down, turned upside down, and everything, your pillowcases, the boarding master would go through it, staff members would go through it, looking for food or any illegal items, Good times. I mean, imagine that. The boarding master standing there, looking at you and thinking, what is this? Where did this cookie come from? Whose cookie is this? Okay, it wasn't that intense, but it was illegal to have cookies. Yeah, just illegal. Like, you can't do that. Contraband of the highest order. Now, back to Sushi family. So, now, the Sushi family gang would then, obviously, kids, you can't tell them not to have stuff when they want to eat stuff, You're reading, you are in your blankets, going through a chemistry textbook. Imagine being hungry and not being able to munch on something because you can only eat what's coming out of the kitchen, and the kitchen only gets opened at certain points of the day, and you are not allowed not to go. You have to go there, you have to sit there, you have to eat it. So if you don't feel like eating when the dining hall is open, well, tough luck. It's not going to be open when you suddenly feel like eating. You have to eat now and wait for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours until the next meal. Whew. It's a hard knocks life. Na, 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 na. Okay, I shouldn't try and sing because I'm not much of a singer. Yeah, let's take a short break. After the break, I have now exhausted this background information. I will now focus on the Sushi family and stop talking about the background information that I was trying to give you. You are listening to Fighting Together, where in this segment, a bunch of students were trying to fight a system that labeled cookies as contraband. Whose chocolate chip cookie is this? Huh? Answer me. I said, whose cookie is Ngoselati? Bring my shambok. I am not leaving this dormitory until I get an answer. Good times, good times, good times. Let's take a short break.
Are you tired of consuming the same old content? Bored by the lack of variety? Stick around. Maybe this podcast will help.
Okay, I made the break short so that you wouldn't forget any of the backstory that I gave you so that the Sushi family story can make sense. I don't know. If the break became too long, you'd forget the backstory and some of what I'm about to say might lose its relevance or meaning or something, Right, Sushi family. So now, I've talked about the strict rule against bringing in food, blah, 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 blah. Now, at some point in time, you start picking up ways to circumvent the system, ways to smuggle food, and I won't dig into those ways in this episode. Maybe in future episodes of the podcast, where I see it necessary, I shall revisit this subject and tell you about just some of the tactics that we went through to try and bring in stuff like peanut butter, Yeah, anyway, so the Sushi family now, they happened to be a guy whose family had a shop, and this shop was in the capital city, and every now and again, not always, but every now and again, there was a bus that would leave the school with either athletes or some kind of drama club or some kind of group of students who are going somewhere to do something. Because sometimes our school would have an athletic competition with a rival school somewhere across the country or across the province or whatever, And in doing so, the bus would take teachers and students, and then they would go off to wherever they needed, do their thing, and come back. And because these journeys tend to be a bit long or whatever, they obviously have to stop for food or something, Yeah, and in doing so, that's how smuggling, not all of the smuggling, but that's how some of the smuggling happened. You weren't really supposed to buy stuff that you would bring back with you to school. You weren't supposed to do that, but hey, students, kids, teenagers, And the teachers that went with these students, in most cases, tended, I don't know, tended to be cool teachers, the laid-back kind of teachers who kind of allowed certain things, like, okay, fine, you can buy yourself some chocolate chip cookies. Okay. Yeah, and this whole thing was now something that's part of the smuggling system, to say there's a team of rugby players, or there's a team of netball players that's going to leave the school, or there's a team of the debate club is going somewhere, and people try and work out what can we smuggle in using this team or this crew or whatever, Yeah, and one of the ways smuggling was done was a member of what was later called the Sushi family. Like I said, his family, his parents, owned a shop in the capital city. And if the bus happened to be going through the capital city, there would be provisions made that whoever can should head off to the shop and say to the parents or whoever was there, hey, I'm from so-and-so's school. Our school happened to be in the area. He gave me a list of stuff that he wants. And then obviously the parents or whoever is working in the shop, if the parents were there, I don't know if the parents were there or whatever. I wasn't part of the Sushi family. But anyway, they'll be like, oh yeah, you're from the school. Oh, this is great. Here you go. Here's some food items. We hope you'll be able to smuggle them in. If not, tough luck. And there you go, Or in some cases, some students prefer to buy from that shop to say, well, since this is a shop that's part of our circle of people we know, why not buy from someone we know who, can benefit from that? Yeah, and people would prefer to buy from that shop. And in this shop, they had instant noodles. We didn't know instant noodles at the time, right? But they had them in this shop, and I can't begin to tell you what a treasure it was to discover instant noodles at the time we did. Because at this time, it was a new food item that wasn't really known in Zimbabwe. So it was like, what is this delicious thing? What? So quick to make, so easy to make, and A la carte. It was something we'd never tasted, something. And you have to know, we are stuck in a boarding school that doesn't allow the smuggling of food. Then suddenly, these packets of stuff you put in hot water for 2 minutes are in front of us, and we taste it, and it tastes nothing like boiled cabbage or sadza, And it came with the spices. For me, the spices are what sold it, We're suddenly feeling like some kind of chemistry experts. Different people were coming up with different ways on at what point in time do you put the spices? How do you put the spices? How do you get the maximum flavor? Should you put it in the water? Should you put it after? How do you drain the water? Now, you have to know that we are not allowed to bring food. So, we definitely are not allowed to bring cooking utensils. Yeah. And now enters these technologically advanced buckets that came into play. There were certain buckets that people discovered. Now, these buckets were like no other buckets you have ever seen. They were buckets which came bundled together with a water heating element. Now, this water heating element was meant to be thrown in the water. You plug it in onto the electricity. I know, it sounds like some kind of very dangerous operation, and I think if things go wrong, it could be very deadly. So you have an element that's placed in the water, and you plug it onto the power socket, switch on the electricity. After a while, the water will heat up, boil, etc., etc. And now, these elements were either fixed at the bottom of the bucket, or they came loose, depending, with the brand or whatever. Eventually, we started getting those elements into the school. We started smuggling them into the school, and they became the backbone of the cooking of this sushi. Like I said, this wasn't done by everyone. I know I said we, but I wasn't really part of the sushi family. But even I want to belong, so I will say we. We. Yeah, anyway, I wasn't part of the sushi family, and they would then use these elements. And you have to know, these operations were done in secret, because you don't know who will see you, and you don't know what the person who sees you will think about it. They could decide to snitch. Snitching was a huge crime. Like, if you were caught to be a snitch who goes around telling the staff members, telling teachers, telling the boarding master about the operations that happen in our dorms or the smuggling that's happening, if you snitched about this stuff, oh, you were a marked man. Oh no. So, to avoid that, people did these whole operations, the cooking and everything. It was done in secret. And it wasn't easy to do it in secret, because sometimes your dormitory room, if you're in Form 1, would have up to 35 people in the same room. It looked like, when there's a storm or a hurricane that's about to hit those first world countries, and then they go in panic mode and they hide in a place where everyone comes together and sleeps under the same roof. A bit like that. Some of the dormitories were a bit like that, where it's one big room with 35 people in it, all on their beds. And there are no compartments or divisions. It's just one roof, 4 walls, one door, several windows. Not enough windows, but several windows nonetheless. So for you to then trust every person in there was difficult. Now imagine the kind of coyness required to cook several packets of sushi without the other 34 people even realizing that there's someone cooking something in here. And just to show you how difficult that was, the power sockets were limited. So in a room with so many people, you could potentially have 2, or if you're lucky, maybe 4 power sockets. But in most cases, most likely maybe 2 power sockets. So you need power, you need electricity to cook the sushi. And the 2 power sockets, which are used for ironing clothes, because everyone had an iron, or at least almost everyone had an iron to iron their clothes, you had to cook in a way that more than 30 other people, at no point in time, will think, oh, let me iron the clothes I want to wear tomorrow. If they do that and start walking towards the power socket while you are there, you kind of have to explain, where's this cable going? There's a cable on the power socket. And then the person follows the cable under the beds and finds a bucket with boiling sushi. So it was difficult, but the Sushi family were masters. Obviously, by the time the gang started, the Sushi gang, the Sushi family, by the time it came into play, we were no longer in Form 1. So as you mature with the streams, as you go to Form 2, Form 3, Form 4, and so on, you now start having less and less people in your dorms. You start having rooms that have like 8 people in them. You start having rooms that have 15 people in them. Less and less and less people, 6 people, and so on. But still, these rooms had, they were still open, in the sense that anyone can walk in anytime. There were no doors that you could lock. So what you had was a long hallway, right? And then this hallway would have entrances to different rooms, but the entrances into the specific rooms had no doors. So anyone can come out of the hallway at any time and walk into your room of 15 people, walk into your room of 8 people. So less people, but still not as private, Yeah, and the smuggling of these, I know, you must be thinking, Tafadzwa, you keep saying Sushi family and talking about noodles. Sushi and noodles are 2 different things. Instant noodles are not sushi. And this is where we're now about to get to the end of this segment. The reason why it was called Sushi family was because the most common brand, or the first brand of instant noodles that we got exposed to while this thing was still new, it was a brand that was called Sushi. So the instant noodle brand was called Sushi, and it had instant noodles in the packets. And we essentially, being people who are in a landlocked country, Zimbabwe has no oceans, no beaches, and even if it did, that doesn't mean you have sushi in your culture, yeah. Even with all that, we were not exposed to what sushi is. We were not exposed to what instant noodles are. So effectively, when a brand called Sushi brought into our country instant noodles, we thought, oh, so this is sushi. Hence, the Sushi family, which cooked instant noodles, was born. And yeah, some people wondered why it's called Sushi family, and they didn't know why it's called Sushi family, because in as much as some people knew, some people didn't, it kind of had to be kept a secret, because you couldn't go around telling people everywhere that, oh no, we are called the Sushi family because we smuggle instant noodles and then we cook them while you're sleeping and have a feast while the rest of you are out there sleeping on your boiled cabbages and 1 egg per week. Commoners. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. I think by now you already know that Fighting Together is a podcast where personally I looked on the internet. I looked on the content that's on the internet. And some of the content is toxic. Some of it is harmful. Some of it just leaves you feeling empty inside. This podcast, if I do it correctly, this podcast is meant to give you a form of companionship of sorts, I give you stories that are from personal experiences. If you go on YouTube and watch a YouTube video right now, it's, I have a kind of script on my podcast episode where I say this episode is about blah, blah, blah. But it's not really scripted, What I'm telling you is stuff I experienced, stuff I saw, stuff that's hopefully wholesome. But when you go like anywhere on the internet, the stuff lacks that human connection, you know. You could have a favorite YouTube series you have, and it could be 5 minutes long, 10 minutes long, but just look at this podcast. And hopefully, when you look at this podcast, you can tell that we're trying to give you something meaningful, I hope. And at the same time, something that's not toxic, you know, something that makes you think, why on earth do I watch this stuff? You know, why on earth do I don't know. I hope no one is now sitting here and thinking, why on earth was I listening to stories about Sushi family? Yeah, because ultimately fighting together is hopefully going to be a place where you get some kind of human connection. Well, as much of a human connection as you can get from a podcast. My name is Tafadzwa. Thank you so much for sticking around. In the next segment, I have more groups that I want to talk to you. I almost made it perfectly. Let me try that again. In the next segment, I have more groups that I want to talk to you about. I've talked to you about Sushi Family, a instant noodle cooking secret society that was in my high school. But enough about that. We shall now end it here and move on to 2 other groups. And these 2 groups are from the Bible. Stick around and I guarantee you it's going to be awesome.
This podcast was made possible through your donations, prayers, and continued support.
These days, the internet is filled with toxic content, politics, depressing news, and statistics. If you want a bit of refuge from all that chaos, then visit www.dailypodcast.show, where we give you hope, hymns, and something different.
You are listening to Fighting Together. It's a podcast that's coming to you from Zimbabwe. The name of the podcast is Fighting Together. The website where you can find this podcast, the home of this podcast, is www.dailypodcast.show. I'm very excited. At the beginning of this episode, I talked about how when people are reading the Bible, sometimes some of the things that are in a story, in a Bible story, gets lost to them. You know, we lose some of the meanings because of incorrect assumptions. I've talked about groups in this entire episode of the podcast. I talked about the Sushi family. Now that you know what the Sushi family is and what they were all about, when you hear, let's say, a random story saying a member of the Sushi family asked to volunteer to help out in the school kitchen, you know, already, because you know what the Sushi family is all about, you're already asking yourself, oh no, why is he asking to join? Why is he asking to help out in the school kitchen? Does he want to steal some pots from the school kitchen so that he can smuggle them back to his dormitory so that they can cook the instant noodles properly? I don't know, you know, because you now have a backstory and understanding of the Sushi family. When they get mentioned, it's no longer just a series of words that hold no meaning, you know. It's now something that's contributing to whatever story you're being told, you know. And that's what I said when I started this episode. I mentioned that people mistakenly do that in the Bible, where they hear about a certain group of people who are in the Bible. Sushi family is a group. It's not in the Bible, but it's a group of people. They have values as a group of people, blah, 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 you know. But when we come into the Bible, you find a group of people that have a name, that have principles and values and stuff they believe in and stuff they don't believe in, and so on and so on. And knowing that helps to put context to some of the incidents that happen in the Bible, you know. That's what I was trying to get us at. That's the point I've been driving towards. Let's take, for example, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They were the two groups that tend to kind of approach Jesus and challenge Jesus or ask Jesus a question like, should we pay taxes to Caesar? Now, knowing what group that person belongs to, the person who's asking this question, helps you understand the angle or the reason why they asked the question. You get what I'm trying to say? I hope it's making sense. Yeah, so let's buckle up. After this upcoming break, I am going to dig even deeper and prove to you that the Bible becomes more exciting after you know who the Pharisees are and who the Sadducees are.
You are listening to Fighting Together. Sit back, relax, and enjoy our daily episodes.
Get your Bible ready. The next segment has now begun.
Right, so to help us get excited, to help us familiarize ourselves with these two groups of people, we have now moved away from all those other groups I was talking about. I think throughout this episode, I mentioned a lot of groups. I touched on Sushi family, I touched on the Three Mosquitoes, and all those groups. Yeah. Anyway, now that we are focusing on the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and we are about to bring this episode to an end, let me read for you. I am going to read from Matthew chapter 22, verse 23. That same day, the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him with a question. Now, I've said it, it's Matthew chapter 22, verse 23. It started off by saying that same day. If you go back above that particular verse, and I always talk about context, that you mustn't just pull a Bible story without looking into the context of what's happening. Not just, it's something that happens where if you look on social media, people have a tendency of taking a photo of a highlighted Bible verse and then they just snap one verse and they go, look at what the Bible is saying. Can you believe this? And they ignore context. They ignore the verses that's above that verse. They ignore the verses that are below that verse. In fact, they ignore the entire chapter. So I encourage you to, after I'm done with this podcast episode, visit and look at why it started off by saying that same day. I guess that's kind of like your homework. Write down on a piece of paper, Matthew chapter 22, verse 23. Starts off by saying that same day. It's easy to remember because it's Matthew chapter 22, verse 23. Sequential numbers. 22 is the chapter, 23 is the verse. Homework of the day. Go back and see for yourself why it says that same day. What else happened on that day? So now, as I was saying, context. Right. That same day, the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him with a question. Teacher, they said, Moses told us that if a man dies without having children. Now, I've emphasized the importance of groups and what groups believe in. You can have a group of you and your friends, and you call yourself the Pink Brothers. And as part of your group mandate, you say to yourselves, we wear pink socks every Monday, every Wednesday, and every Friday. It becomes a group thing, to say, in our crew, in our gang, I don't know if it's a gang when you're wearing pink socks. It becomes part of the group DNA to say, this is what we are all about. We wear pink socks every Monday, every Wednesday, and every Friday. And that's how we roll. So it's important to remember that the reason why most of these groups came to Jesus was they had their own hidden agendas. And that's what we're trying to dig into. So let's go back. They're not asking these questions because they're curious and they love Jesus and they are so excited and can't wait to hear the answer and they will believe in the answer. That's not why they're asking. They have hidden agendas, They are hiding their pink socks. They are hiding their mandate. They are like the Sushi family who volunteer to help out in cleaning the kitchen because secretly they want to steal a pot or two or a pan so that they can use back in the dormitories to cook their contraband instant noodles. Yeah, so hidden agendas, very important. Let's go back. Verse 24. Teacher, they said, Moses told us that if a man dies without having children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up offspring for him. Right? This is a Moses thing that they were talking about. Now, there were 7 brothers among us. The first one married and died, and since he had no children, he left his wife to his brother. I will pause it here, and while you're digesting that, let me pick up my Shona Bible so that I can alternate between Shona and English. In Shona, Matthew chapter 22, verse 23. Like I said, I will read a verse and alternate English Shona, English Shona. And the reason why I do that is because if you're not a native English speaker like me, Shona, sometimes when you read something in English, it's so overwhelming that in as much as you hear it, you don't really hear it. And then when it comes back in Shona, you'll be like, oh no, now I get it. Not that you didn't get it the first time, but yeah, since I'm a native Shona speaker, it's also helpful for me to go back to my language. That way, when I expurgate eventually, I'm well balanced in my mind. Right? So, Matthew chapter 22, verse 23. Pazuva rimwe chetero, vaSadhusi, avo vanoti hakuna kumuka kweakafa, vakauya kwaari nomubvunzo vakati, Mudzidzisi, Mozisi akatiudza kuti murume akafa asina vana, munun'una wake anofanira kuwana shirikadzi agomuberekera vana. Zvino pakati pedu paiva navanakomana vomunhu mumwe, 9. Wokutanga akawana mudzimai ndokufa iye afa, uye ndokubva iye afa, uye sezvo akanga asina vana akasiyira munun'una wake mukadzi. Right? So now verse 26 in English. The same thing happened to the second and third brother, right down to the 7th. 26 in Shona. Zvimwe chetezvo zvakaitika kune wechipiri nowechitatu kusvikira kune wechinomwe. 27 right through to 28. Finally, the woman died. Now then, at the resurrection, whose wife will she be of the 7, since all of them were married to her? In Shona 27 and 28 in Shona. Pakupedzesera mukadzi akazofawo. Zvino pakumuka kweakafa achava mukadzi waaniko pavanomwe vaya sezvo vose vaiva murume wake. Now, I will pause it there for now and let's look at that. We have heard this whole thing, right? They are essentially coming to Jesus and saying, so teacher, tell us, you are the one who says there's a resurrection, right? And already it's now framing, it's putting into perspective what their objective was. The objective of the Sadducees was they wanted all those people around Jesus to hear Jesus stammering or to hear Jesus stumble upon receiving this question, because there is no way this was a real life situation. Maybe it was, but there is just no way. I mean, they are saying there is a woman, she was married, the husband died, then the brother took the wife and he died, and then all the way up to the 7th one, none of them had a child with this woman, and now you tell us about resurrection. Because like I said, groups have identities, and knowing and understanding these whole identity dynamics will make the Bible so much more exciting, right? And this group of Sadducees, they're different from Pharisees. Because when you ask someone, who asked about the resurrection? And someone can go, I don't know. I think it was the Sadducees or maybe it was the Pharisees. I don't know. Potato. No, it's not potato. No. Pharisees are very distinct. And we'll get to the Pharisees so that I can show you the distinct characteristics and the distinct attitudes that they had. Kind of like how Sushi family was very distinct in their agenda. Sushi family was all about something. The continued flow of smuggling Yema instant noodles, They were all about that, managing how they were going to smuggle it, how they were going to store it, how they were going to keep enough stock to make sure that when the next bus leaves the school or when an opportunity arises, they can smuggle in more instant noodles, etc., etc. That's what they were all about. And knowing that explains the behavior they had in the classroom, the behavior they had in the dining hall, the behavior they had when they were coming to school at the beginning of a new term. All of their things get explained once you understand the core DNA. And sometimes as Christians or even as new people, someone who knows nothing about God, we read the Bible and then we go, okay, I've read the Bible. Yeah, it's fine, I guess. Because a lot of the DNA aspects of what's going on behind the scenes, behind the curtains, it's not as apparent as it should be. I picked this particular verse, and it's an easy verse to work with because unlike other verses, this particular verse clearly explained one of the characteristics of the Sadducees and said they believed that there is no resurrection. But when you see the Sadducees coming back to Jesus in other stories, in other Bible chapters, in other Bible books, that aspect of them is not mentioned like it was mentioned here. So I chose this one because having that mentioned made it easier to work with, But in other places, where they are still on the same agenda of, there's no resurrection. But it wasn't mentioned, and that agenda molds their attitude towards Jesus. Because they want to catch Jesus in a lie, to catch Jesus, which is not possible, which is impossible, But they believe that the whole resurrection thing is a lie. So they want to catch Jesus in a corner. Now, they've asked, 7 brothers died. All married this woman. None of them had a child. She also died. Now tell us. Tell us, mister, there is a resurrection. Who is the husband of this woman in the resurrection? Like I've said, they're not asking for the purpose of learning. They're not asking because they are curious, because they are excited students. No, they're asking because they're trying to trap Jesus in a way. And I want you to read the answer for yourself. Pick up your Bible, have a Bible installed on your phone, though I personally recommend having a hard copy. Go into the answer yourself. But the summary of what Jesus says to them was, the way we think about life here on earth, it's different from life after death. What we are, how our bodies are, who we are is going to be different. Some of us think when we get to heaven, we're going to be wearing our favorite t-shirts with Mickey Mouse on them or whatever it is you love. We don't know what kind of shape, what kind of form, what kind of, right now, human beings are mostly made of water, and I think we are mostly also made of carbon. We don't know what kind of elements we'll be made of. Because maybe the elements aren't even on the periodic table because we'll be in a place that's divorced from the earth, the universe we are in, and the periodic table of elements that make up all the things that we can see right now. After death, we'll be in a place where all those aspects that we hold near and dear right now shall, I don't know, there shall be a major change in how things work, let's just say, So this whole concept of married to this person or that person, a lot of it is going to change. The concept of, hey, look at that guy. I know that guy. He was my English teacher. It's, once in the next life, we don't know how that is going to work. So much of what we know now won't be there. And we can't explain why or how, because we haven't been there yet. We haven't gone there yet, So Jesus is essentially saying to them, you are asking me as if heaven is a place where people sit on their computers and say, honey, can you make me another pot of coffee? And then the 7 husbands will be fighting over, saying, no, she's my honey. She needs to make me the coffee because I'm the husband. No, heaven is not that place, because you are thinking in a human sense, and yet it's not a human realm, And so I don't know. Yeah, anyway, I just paraphrased this because what I mostly want you to do is go pick up the Bible, read what Jesus actually said for yourself. And moving on now, because like I said, Pharisees, Sadducees is not a potato case. Both of them repeatedly came to Jesus trying to attack him or trick him, but their identities and their DNA was different. Now, to bring it all into perspective, I've got with me here a Bible that, luckily for me, if I can find the page, it's got a back side of it where certain words are explained, certain things are explained. Things like baptism. It's kind of like it's not really a dictionary. It's a bit like an index dictionary of sorts, where it explains that, this thing means that, and so on and so on. Now, in the back there, unfortunately, it's the Shona Bible, so I'm going to read who the Sadducees were in Shona, and hopefully I won't butcher it when I explain in English. So in Shona, here's what it was saying. Don't worry, don't leave the podcast. I will explain in English for those that don't understand Shona. Anyway. Vasadducee. Definition. Iri rakanga riri boka rezvematongerwo enyika rakanga rakarerekera kuchinamato. Vakanga vari vaGiriki pamufungiro avo, uye vakanga vari vanhu vakanga vakapfuma, vari nhengo dzeboka ravaJudha voumambo. Right? Vakanga vari vanhu vakapfuma, vari nhengo dzeujudha veumambo. Right? And vaitenda muchitendero chechihereni. VaSadducee vairamba zvokumuka kwavakafa, uye vakanga vasingatende kuti kune kurarama pamweya. Vaitenda kuti mweya unofa pamwe chete nemuviri. Now, from what I've read so far, essentially in English, what it was saying is, it said these Sadducees, they were Greek in their way of thinking, and they were rich, right? And they had a position, a high position in society, right? I'm going to try and paraphrase what was being said without, hopefully without overstepping how it was said, hopefully, right? And I think them being rich and being of a upper class was what made them not like the concept of life after death. Because essentially, they were in control. When you have money, you're in control. When you have wealth, you're in control. Even if you don't have a political post, the fact that you are in a society and you are a billionaire already gives you some form of control. So I think they hated the concept of resurrection. And this is my personal opinion. Because when you are such a powerful person, imagine being told there is a life that comes after. You'll be like, what? You mean I'm going to have to accumulate my billions all over again? You would have questions like, if there is a life that comes after this one, how on earth am I going to transfer my money to that life? How am I going to transfer my palaces and my gold and my diamonds into the next life? Who's the bookie? Who's the accountant who can do that for me? So they probably resisted the concept of resurrection, because how can they be? How can that be? We need to believe that this is the only life there is, because we have accumulated so much, and this is only my personal opinion, right? And already you're now starting to see, right? We know that from what was said in the Bible, we know that they believe that there is no resurrection. But from what's now being said in this index, and obviously these indexes, you have to kind of take them and research further into them to make sure they're accurate, and so on and so on. And from what's being said here, their lives were, they were well off, better off than your average person, you know. And being such people, to me, it's starting to make sense why they didn't like the idea. They wanted to believe in Jesus. They wanted to follow Jesus. But hey, this whole concept you're telling us of life after death, no. Whew. Yeah, anyway, so once you start hearing that, you know, it's... I'll go on and read an additional thing. And like I said, this, what I'm reading, in as much as it's in the Bible, it's not really part of the Bible. These are back pages, like commentary pages, index pages. They're not part of the Bible scripture, but it's essentially there to kind of help someone have an understanding. And obviously it's something that once you read, you kind of have to look into, cross-check and make sure that it's accurate, because they're not actual Bible verses that I'm reading, right? And anyway, so let me read a bit more. It says, vaiona Mwari sokunge akange asinei namararamiro avanhu uye kuti akanga asingade kupindira pamararamiro avo. Now, what that said, it's they saw God as someone who wasn't there to meddle in how life was, you know, who wasn't there to interfere with our day-to-day lives. That's how they perceived him to be. I guess because of that, they then asked, oh, okay, so if all they are saying, and that's them talking to Jesus, is real, so tell us, if I marry this woman and then I die, and so now they're trying to prove that God has nothing to do with our day-to-day lives, you know, because how will he address this thing if he's so almighty, you know? Because of their wealth, they probably felt like there is no other power above them, you know, to some degree, because of, I don't know, you know, and the concept of a new life, another life, and a heaven, a place where there's a king, to them must have been painful, because they have accumulated all this wealth, and suddenly you're telling us we have to press the reset button, go to a whole new another dimension, another form of existence where none of my millions of dollars will follow me. Yeah, and now that you have that understanding, next time you pick up your Bible, I think you're going to be excited when you hear, because obviously this is not the only time they talk to Jesus. Next time you hear them talking to Jesus again and again and again in different situations, you're going to see for yourself. You'll be like, oh, it's becoming more and more clear. The agenda is becoming more and more clear, you know. And now, to help you see how different they are from the Pharisees, I'll take a short break and dig into the Pharisees after the break.
We hope you have enjoyed that segment. Let's take a short break before we resume our podcast.
The splendor of a king, clothed in majesty, let all the earth rejoice, all the earth rejoice. He wraps himself in light, and darkness tries to hide. It trembles at his voice, trembles at his voice. How great is our God! Sing with me, how great is our God! And all will see how great is our God.
Okay, so before the break, we touched on the Sadducees, and I was trying to get people to a place where we can stop interchangeably thinking that Sadducees and Pharisees are the same thing, because we're depriving ourselves of a deeper understanding of what would be happening in a particular story if we mistakenly think potato, Now, back to that back page, to those back pages in my Bible, those indexed dictionary-like pages. When it talks about the Pharisee, it says, it essentially says, let me read, vaFarisi vaizvikudza vachiti ndivo vanoziva uye vaichengeta murayiro, vachishingaira kuti vauyise rumutso rwomweya pakati pavanhu veIsraeri kubudikidza nokuchengeta murayiro. Now, these were the ones that were focused on the law. They boasted amongst the community, saying they are the keepers of the law. They can keep the law. But what happened eventually over time, their passion to keep the law became a heartless plight, They got to a stage where, how can I explain it? When someone becomes academic in their approach to doing things, they became more like lawyers, who then start looking for loopholes in the law. A very good example that I can give you, which was I'm going to paraphrase an example that was used. I had it being used by another preacher, but I'll paraphrase it a little bit and say, imagine, let's say, for example, there is a law. This is just an example. I'm not saying there is, but as an example, let's say there is a law that says whenever you get to the traffic lights, if a beggar comes to your window and asks for money, let's say there is a law that says you need to give that person the money, This is just an example. It's not something that's in the Bible. There are no traffic lights in the Bible. Anyway, so the law, that's the law. So what the Pharisees were now good at was the way they followed the law became a heartless process where they would then look for the smallest money denomination, They, if possible, they can go to a bank, collect cents and cents and cents. It was used differently. The example was used differently, but so that I don't confuse myself, I'm paraphrasing it in that. Imagine someone who then goes to the bank with the $100 note and says, can you give me 1 cent coins that are worth $100? And then each time that person passes the roadblock or the traffic lights rather, if a beggar comes to them, you then pull out 1 cent and give it to the beggar, knowing full well that a bubble gum costs 50 cents, Which means you're going to have to pass this traffic light 50 times before this beggar can buy a bubble gum from what you're giving him, Yeah, so that's what the Pharisees became good at. They became good at looking at the law and then dissecting it to the most minimum, most basic thing that they can do. They became like lawyers to say, well, you said I should give, so you never said how much, They became experts in dancing around the law. That's how I can put it, because now when people hear about the law, they think about the 10 Commandments. It wasn't the case. There were more than 600 laws, different laws. And now, so you have the 10 Commandments on the one hand, which helped to kind of encompass most of what the law stood for. But behind that, you still had more than 600 laws that were there where you get so much stuff in there, an eye for an eye and so on and so on. Like a lot of things were behind the 10 Commandments, there were additional stuff there. And they were good with maneuvering, something that the ordinary person could not really do, And let me go back and read a little bit more, like over here. It says, panguva yaJesu, vaFarisi vaitotariswa nenzira yakanaka chaizvo navanhu vaimirira kuzvibata noutsvene. Now, it says that during the time of Jesus, actually, the Pharisees were looked at in good light because they were like the shining example in the society, since they were the ones who knew the law, maneuvered around the law. They boasted, and people looked at them and thought, wow, if only I can be like these guys. Look at them, because they were always boasting and always above everyone else. So people actually looked at them in different light. But now with what Jesus was teaching, they started to be some kind of friction. Let me read a little bit more. VaFarisi vaigara mukumbira kuti vadye naye pane dzimwe nguva, uye vamwe vaFarisi somuenzaniso Nikodemo vakaienda kwaari muchivande. VaFarisi vaimuyambira nezvenjodzi pane imwe nguva. Now, okay, so that part said, in as much as they had moments of friction with him, some of the Pharisees would actually call him and wanted to eat with him, to sit with him, because to them it was clear that this man has some kind of power, But a lot of what Jesus was saying now was very difficult for them to digest, especially when he talked about things of saying, when he said, the greatest commandment is the commandment of love, If you are to love your neighbor as you love yourself, then you have fulfilled the law, You have done everything that's required in all the laws. And the Pharisees would sit there and think, what on earth are you talking about? We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of laws, and you come here telling us that if we love our neighbor, then we have fulfilled the law? Do you know, we have law, but they didn't take the time. Some of them took the time to sit with him, to eat with him, and try to just kind of understand him, Because it was apparent when he performed miracles, they could see that, this man has got power. But then there were moments when he would say something and they would be like, no, we don't agree with what you're saying, They weren't able to grasp his mission, And for example, the love situation. We talk about you should not kill. If you love your neighbor the same way that you yourself love yourself, there is no way. And by neighbor, we mean every person. So if you're hiding in a bush and someone is walking along the path and it's dark, in that point in time, that person who is walking in the path is your neighbor. You are neighbors in this forest. But for you to jump out of the bush and stab that person, you're killing your neighbor, because in that moment, you are neighbors. You are geographical neighbors who are next to each other in a bush in the middle of the night. So, loving your neighbor the same way that you love yourself is the best approach to all the commandments. Because even adultery, for you to then go and take another man's wife, you wouldn't do that because you love yourself so much that to think of someone taking your own, it's like the paradox of it is just overwhelming. It's something you wouldn't do. But now for the Pharisees, this meant their power, their authority of having memorized the law, having had the loopholes studied, and all the stuff they had carrying in their heads was being stripped away by one simple law of loving your neighbor. And they were like, what? And now their mission was to try and prove to Jesus that, you know what? We need to put Jesus in a place where he can see that no one is above the law. Because Jesus is saying, I am from God. God is in me, and I am also in God. And the Pharisees would hear that and go, what? Are you saying you are God? And so much stuff didn't sit well with them. So they wanted to prove, not just to Jesus, but also to people around Jesus, to say, you know what? This Jesus is good, he's powerful, but he's under the law, He's also under the law, just like all of us, They wanted that point driven because they were masters of the law, So if they can bring him to a point where he can kneel down to the law, then it kind of evens the battlefield. Other than having Jesus walking around saying he was sent by the Father and all this stuff that he kept saying, that didn't sit well. So already now you're seeing a big difference because they believe in life after death. They believe in so many other things that Jesus also believes in, which makes them completely different from the Sadducees, who couldn't process the idea of not having their wealth and moving to another life where things will be reset and things will be different and you can't transfer your bank balance to that other life because it's a spiritual. Oh no. So their problems with Jesus were different. And next time, my objective is that next time you are in a Bible study or in a church or you're reading by yourself at home, when you hear the word Pharisee, I want you to kind of have an idea of what that represents. When you hear the word Sadducee, I also want you to have an understanding of what group that is. The same way you have an understanding of the groups I talked about. Sushi family, Now you know what the group was all about. So in a future podcast, if I say, right, so there was a member of the Sushi family who played basketball. You already know that, so he played basketball, which means each time the basketball team left and went to a basketball tournament, he would use that as an opportunity to smuggle in instant noodles, because he's a basketball player. And now it makes sense, I don't have to go back to explain those things. But unfortunately, when it comes to groups in the Bible, there are so many groups in the Bible that people misunderstand or people just skim over, thinking, blah, 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 blah. Even locations, Sometimes people read the Bible verse and it's talking about a location where an incident happened. Because we don't know this location, we don't understand the significance of the location. We just go blah, blah, blah. And yet we lose so much context. There are certain things like, let's take something, from the modern world. When people ran to the Capitol Hill building place and went into it, Imagine someone reading about that 2,000 years from now. They need to first of all understand what Capitol Hill is, what happens there, and so on, and so on, and so on. Now imagine them reading about Capitol Hill saying blah, blah, blah. And it's only like 3 sentences without the backstory of what the place is, what it signifies, and so on and so on. They will understand what's being said in those 3 sentences, but they will lose so much depth that they can have, additional depth that can be had from understanding the place, from understanding the groups, I hope that helped, right? So now that we have that understanding of the Pharisees and their mission to try and put the law into its place, to say, we shall get to heaven by law. It's law. We need to have the law, understand the law. This whole concept of grace, and even the idea that Jesus was to later die on the cross, and all that, it's something, if you are of a Pharisee thinking, it's something that's going to be very difficult for you to digest, Now, let's have the law in our mind as we now read from the book of John, right? I'm going to read from John chapter 8, and I'll start off from verse 3. But please feel free to always go back to these verses and read them in their entirety on your own. Verse 3, John chapter 8. As he was speaking, the teachers of religious law, even the phrasing is now different from the Sadducees, the teachers of religious law. And when you hear lawyers, Sometimes someone can kill someone, commit murder, but if he was arrested improperly, or if the evidence was handled improperly, or the chain of custody cannot be established in a court of law properly, that person could go free because of a lawyer, So let me read that again. John chapter 8 verse 3. As he was speaking, the he refers to Jesus. So as Jesus was speaking, the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. They put him in front of the crowd. Now, once again, look at this. These are people who once dined with Jesus secretly. Some of them secretly, like Nicodemus, went to Jesus at night and asked him questions to say, Master, now I heard you talking about being born again. Now, how can a man be born again? They did this secretly. But now, as we are reading, in public, in front of people, they are coming to Jesus with a woman, like the verse said. They put her in front of the crowd. Now, in Shona, let me read in Shona, and you can hear about the crowd also and the incident. Johani chapter 8, ndimadiki yechitatu. Vadzidzisi vomurayiro navaFarisi vakapinda nomukadzi akanga abatwa achita upombwe. Vakamuita kuti amire pamberi peboka. Uye vakati kuna Jesu, mudzidzisi, mukadzi uyu abatwa achita upombwe. Mumurayiro waMozisi akatirayira kuti titake namabwe vakadzi vakadai. Zvino imi munoti kudii? Now, let me just catch up in English up to the point that I got to in Shona. Verse 4. Teacher, they said to Jesus, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses says to stone her. What do you say? Now, I've said Sadducees would not have asked this because this has nothing to do with life after death, which was the thing that disgruntled them, the thing that they just couldn't get over. Pharisees, however, asked it, which is two separate groups. Why did the Pharisees ask this? Because this was a moment where they would have wanted to give Jesus a stone so that Jesus can be the first one to stone this woman, right? They're telling Jesus that the law of Moses already tells us that such women should be stoned, So, what do you say? And if Jesus was to say the law is right, I suspect they would have given Jesus a stone to say, okay, great. Now, pick up a stone. Stone her to death because the law says so. They wanted to take Jesus from his position of being God, with him being in the Father and the Father being in him, which is a concept I cannot explain, a concept that we can never fully understand, a concept that we take as we are told, So they want to take Jesus from that rank and put him down to their rank of men, where we just stone each other like animals, They needed that done in public, where people can see. Like I said, they used to invite Jesus to their homes for supper. They could have asked this in private, but no, they needed it in public. And Jesus, knowing them, if you read, they said, verse 6, they were trying to trap him into saying something they could use against him. They were trying to trap him into saying something they could use against him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote in the dust with his finger. Now, in this case, a lot of people have had a lot of commentaries on why Jesus stooped down, akakotama, and started writing on the ground in his finger. A lot of people have discussed why he did that. The one thing that fascinated me, and this is not in the Bible, it's a commentary from those who study the Bible. The one thing that fascinated me was when someone said he was giving them time to be proudful, These people are people of pride, They are people who boast a lot. And while he's stooped down as he was, writing on the ground, it created an illusion of defeat. so that they can boast and rally the crowds and say, huh? Can you see? We now have him thinking, And getting them to that place would make it so much worse when he finally cuts them down to size. You know what I mean? Like, if he had answered immediately, the effect of his answer would have been lessened because it came immediately. But if he allowed them to kind of boast and walk around, because like it said, there was a huge crowd, they chose a moment where Jesus was teaching, which means everyone was looking at Jesus. Now, we know from previous stories that Jesus would teach even up to 5,000 people. So they chose a moment where Jesus is teaching a lot of people. I don't know how many. We're not told in this particular incident how many people are there, but they chose it intentionally because they are people of pride who wanted to make Jesus stumble or fall or fail to answer in front of people. And he's like, okay, I'll let you take in the moment. Right. Let's read that particular part in Shona. John chapter 8 verse 6. Vakanga vachishandisa mubvunzo uyu kuti vamuteye, vawane hwaro hwokumupa mhosva. Asi Jesu akakotama, akatanga kunyora pasi nomumwe wake nechigunwe chake. Akatanga kunyora pasi nomumwe wake. Vakati varamba vachibvunza. Now you see, in English it says, they kept demanding an answer. So he's like crouched down, Jesus is stooped down, and now they kept demanding an answer. And however many people are now looking, whatever place they are in is probably now silent, you know. Yeah. And like I said before, the Pharisees were seen in good light during the time of Jesus because they were believed to be the masters of the law. They were like, if we go back to verse 3, John chapter 8 verse 3, it says, as he was speaking, the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. Now, the teachers of religious law. That's one title you don't earn easily, you know. Yeah, anyway, so they kept demanding an answer. So he stood up again and said, all right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone. Then he stooped down again and wrote in the dust. Let me read that in Shona. John chapter 8, verse 7, all the way to 8. Vakati varamba vachimubvunza, akatwasuka akati kwavari, kana paine asina chivi pakati penyu, ngaave iye wokutanga kupotsera dombo kwaari. In English, all right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone. In Shona, kana paine asina chivi pakati penyu, ngaave iye wokutanga kupotsera dombo kwaari. Akakotamazve, akanyora pasi. Then he went back into his position and continued doodling around on the ground, whatever he was writing or drawing or doing with his finger on the ground. He just continued doing that. And now, this to an ordinary person means nothing. You'll be like, what? What's that all about? But here's the thing. The Pharisees, being men like you, being men like me, being human, they knew that at some point in time they have also sinned, you know. And now what makes it hard was that they knew that because of the things that they have done, they also needed to be stoned. You get where I'm going with this. So now they've presented this woman saying, we need to stone this woman. We need to stone this woman, you know. What say you, Jesus? And now Jesus is saying, oh, no problem. I have no problem with that. But the person who needs to cast the first stone needs to be someone who has never sinned. So anyone who has never sinned, anyone who hasn't sinned, feel free. Because why is that important? Because all the people who have sinned needed to have had been stoned. They should have been stoned to death when they committed their own sins, which means they shouldn't be here to accuse this woman, because they needed to have died long ago, back when they committed their own sins. Which means as this woman commits her sin, they would have been dead, and she would also be stoned like they were also stoned. So you get the dynamic of it. So Jesus answered them in a philosophical way. For me as an ordinary person, I wouldn't have understood what that answer means. But because these were teachers of religious law, Jesus spoke on a wavelength that they understood. They were like, we see what you did there. And obviously, they vanished from there, which shocked the people. People were shocked because, like I said, Pharisees were looked at in good light. It's only now that we have them written in the Bible. It's only now that we study them and we say, hey, these Pharisees weren't so good. We only say that now because we have the Bible in our hands, and we look at the Bible and we look at them and dissect them and cut them to pieces and so on and so on. But you have to know that back in the day, they knew the law, and they were the ones who understood the law more than most people, which meant the average person, the average Joe on the street, admired them. But imagine the shock for that average person when all of the Pharisees walked away. People thought, wait, we thought the Pharisees were perfect. Why are they walking away? Shouldn't they? We thought they know the law. We thought they are perfect. They know the law. They follow the law. They have never sinned. But yet now they are walking away. Why are they walking away? And the Pharisees, knowing who Jesus was, weren't going to dare try and trick him or lie to him that, oh, I've never lied. Let me pick up the stone. And they knew who he was. They have heard of his miracles. They know of his power. So none of them was going to try and pull one over his head and say, well, I'm perfect, so. And which essentially means the only person who was at that location who had the right to stone this woman was Jesus. And not only that woman, I guess he had the right to stone every last Pharisee, because like they had presented, the law of Moses required it. When you sin, you get stoned. End of story, I guess. So now you can see that the answer he gave to the Pharisee was a deep answer. It came because you have to be extremely intelligent. And even intelligence isn't even the word for it. I don't know what to even use as a word. But your brain, you have to be at a high level to use very simple words to deliver a very complicated concept. And the words were very simple. Fine. The first person to cast the stone should be someone who has never sinned. Let's get this started. It's very simple to someone who doesn't understand what was going on. But such a simple answer would not have worked with the Sadducees because they didn't understand the law and they had to be approached differently. I think he probably even laughed at them when they asked about the wife whose husband died and all 7 husbands died. And I think Jesus was probably laughing at them because he knows what life after death is like. He knows it. He knows what kind of form or what kind of lifestyle or what kind of universe or what kind of reality. He knows the kind of dimension, the kind of space or existence that's waiting for us after death. It's not an existence like the one we have now, where I can put my hand in my pocket and pull out an iPhone. That's not the kind of life waiting for us. For all I know, I'm not going to have 2 hands. I'm not going to have 10 fingers. I don't know what kind of shape or form I will have in that life. You don't know. We don't know. But Jesus, being someone who knows, was probably just laughing at them as they're asking this question, saying, your question is now and void, you know. It's an irrelevant question because the life we are talking about here is nothing like the life you are using in your question, you know. It's different. And I think by now, I hope you have a newfound passion to go into the Bible, dig into different encounters where the Pharisees met Jesus, read through them, and laugh as you see the DNA of their group. You're going to laugh as you see how their DNA shows itself in how they ask Jesus, what they ask Jesus about. And these Pharisees, who were experts at the law, wanted to trap Jesus from a law perspective. You can also see how they also tried to do that. And I think we've covered a lot. My name is Tafadzwa. I'm very glad you stuck around. This was a long segment. A very long segment. But I hope you found it beneficial. I hope you're going to be there in the next episode of Fighting Together. God willing, I'll be able to make another episode. And God willing, you shall be able to find it, listen to it, and have a newfound passion for God, for the Bible, for His Word, for His Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.